Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. I think we have a couple more people still trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kristen Lambert. I am the director of the SCALE Award and a member of Mercy Corps' Agriculture Systems technical team on our technical support unit. Thank you again, everyone, for making the time to join us. We think it's going to be a really great discussion today. As you join, if you could please take a minute and introduce yourselves in the chat box so that we know who's joining. If you could list your title and your agency, maybe your location, we'd greatly appreciate that. I'll give you just 1 minute to start those introductions, please. And as you know, we're here today to talk about resilience design for water and landscapes with a focus on the story of the sponge village of Otago. Hopefully some of you have had an opportunity to skim through the primer that captures the story before the event. If not, hopefully you'll take a look at it after our discussion today. I know I speak for all of our presenters as well when I say we've really been looking forward to the opportunity to share this work with you all, and also to tell the stories of some of the other places where similar practices have taken hold. As you can see, even from this first slide, I want to recognize that this was really a multi-partner, multi-donor effort that we're going to be sharing today. There's Danita. Danita funded the NURI program and the training that we're going to be talking about more. The Danish Refugee Council led the technical training in partnership with consultant Warren Brush. And USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, which is the funder of the SCALE Award, which provided funding to capture and to share some of the learning outcomes in this primer. So I want to thank everyone once again for the collaboration on this effort. I think particularly at our current place in time and history and wedged between the release of the IPCC report and the upcoming COP26, that these challenges around climate change really speak to the need for multi-partner efforts and knowledge sharing. And it is really exciting to be part of this effort as well to that end. Next slide, please. For those of you who aren't yet familiar with the SCALE Award, I just wanted to share a quick word about that. SCALE is funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. It's led by Mercy Corps in partnership with Save the Children. And the mandate of SCALE is really to serve as a knowledge sharing, a capacity strengthening, and a research support mechanism for any of BHA's food security programs, including both the emergency and the non-emergency programs. And the focus of our work is on agriculture, natural resource management, and often non-farm livelihoods. I'll be sharing the website at the end, and I definitely encourage you all to poke around there and on the wider food security network for resources and events like this one. And among SCALE's interest areas has been resilient ag, which I know Warren will share more about shortly. And in this space, we're always eager to connect with others to bring out the best practices and resources and learnings, and hence the role that we're playing on this webinar today. Next slide, please. So we have the next 90 minutes together, and here you can see the agenda for how that's going to be laid out. From here, I'll hand over to Warren to talk a little bit about the resilience design principles and the background to this effort. He and Nat will then lead us through a deeper dive of the experience at Otago Village, including some of the key techniques that were used. We'll reflect on some of the key learnings, have a Q&A session, and then wrap up. Next slide, please.
Great.
And then our presenters for today are Natalie Topa and Warren Brush. These are the two trainers who led the training with the NURI program. Nat Topa is a member of the Danish Refugee Council. Her title is Global Advisor for Regenerative Resilience and Circular Bioeconomy. And we have Warren Brush, a global resilience design consultant, who also is an educator, a lecturer, and an implementer in this space. So thank you both again for joining us. And with that, I'll hand over to Warren to talk us through a bit of the background. Thank you.
Thank you, wonderful. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Suzanne. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Well, good. I'm going to step back. One of the things we do in resilience design, one of the principles is that we look from the big patterns before we look to the details. And I wanted to just, bring up, Kristen had talked a little bit about the IPCC, the recent report that came out, and the incredible amount of data that is showing how we are being affected by climate change. And that, it seems to be what the discussion is mostly about in a lot of the humanitarian development space, is how is climate change affecting our different sectors? How is climate change affecting the people that we're working on the ground with? And one of the discussions I don't often hear, or I don't hear it often enough, is a better way of saying it, is that how land degradation is what drives how we receive climate change on the ground and how climate plays out on the ground. So you can have the whole flood drought cycles that we're seeing. There's the greater climactic flood drought cycles, but so much of that can be mitigated through the reversal of land degradation in your own watershed. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and how whenever you have fast moving water on a landscape, it's leaching that landscape of all of its nutrients, it's leaching it of all of the building blocks to have a healthy economy and to have the healthy nutrition. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is addressing climate change through land degradation and creating basically some buffering systems and mitigation systems through land restoration practices. And that brings me, if you could change to the next slide, please. That brings me to look at the roots of a lot of the work that we're doing, that we're drawing from different regenerative movements around the globe that have been working in this space of land restoration and regenerative development and regenerative design for many, many years. And you can go back to even various indigenous cultures who were regenerative for over 1,000 years, had a lot of different really practical ways of maintaining fertility and maintaining the landscape in partnership with their agriculture. And so I want to just mention a few. There's the permaculture movement, the indigenous rights and social justice movements are also a part of this. So much of how we receive climate change on the ground is actually a social justice issue as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through this. We draw from the agroecology, agroforestry. Some of you may have not heard of the soil food web, but it's looking at our soil systems in their biology, not just their chemistry. And it's something that the USDA has already picked up on and is working with, but it is a whole movement globally around soil biology. The rainwater harvesting movement, holistic grazing, farmer managed natural regeneration, biointensive farming, ecosystem restoration, and on are all of these movements that are what help to inform the work that we're doing in resilience design, as well as uniquely within the Danish Refugee Council, which you'll see how Natalie and the team there has taken a lot of that as well, and also used some of resilience design. But resilience design came out of those movements. Next slide, please. And literally, we drew from a lot of the permaculture design methodologies to help develop the resilience design framework under first the TOPS program and then with SCALE. And we've developed the permagarden programs, the resilience design for smallholder farming systems. And then I've been working with Natalie to take it to the next edge of moving it more towards watershed level restoration work and applying resilience design and those other influences into our work, which is where this primer actually came from. And you'll hear a little bit from Natalie about that as well. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of different organizations that are using resilience design right now, and I just want to give a shout out to some of the programs that are doing some larger scale work, including the Mercy Corps program, that's a BHA funded program, and the DR Congo Hill approach, which has had some influence both in towards the Danish Refugee Council, and vice versa. Danish Refugee Council has had some influence on them as well. There's a group in northern Uganda called African Women Rising, and they have been instrumental in helping to develop the permagarden framework as well, and doing it on a large scale. And then, of course, the Danish Refugee Council, and on. There's many other agencies, but it's something where that idea of programming regenerative design into our work, working across sectors and applying it in ways that are stabilizing the ecologies in a landscape is something that more and more agencies are looking at doing, because they're finding that a lot of people are sharing how their ag programming hasn't been working well. It's been, the land degradation's been too much, the chemification is causing long-term problems in the soils, and there's a lot of issues that are basically degrading the overall system that supports their nutrition and economy. Next slide, please. And so what we've done is to basically bring it back. Now we've come from the big picture down to some of the details. Is like looking at the core ecological basis of regeneration, which is the geology, the soils, basically the landform, and how the soil building processes, which, you know, I'm going to share three different, you know, basically the hydrology, the biology, and the geology, but it's how they all integrate together is where we get resilience. And so we're talking about, again, soil and landform. We're talking about the overall health of water and how water moves through our systems and the nutrient carries. And then looking at biodiversity. And when we talk about the biology of a system, is it stable biologically? And so this is the kind of the roots of what all of our programming with resilience design expresses through its unique training program. Go ahead and do your go to the next slide, please. And so one of the things we've done is we've developed through the TOPS program and SCALE, a unique training program. And then working with DRC has been really exciting, because we've expanded on what we were doing with the SCALE and TOPS programs. And so I'm loving this cross-agency collaborative efforts, rather than saying, oh, BHA's this and Danita funded programs are over here. We're saying, hey, how could we get best practices working together? And I'm finding that, you know, working with Natalie and their teams there, it's been such a growing experience for all of us. And the training program has evolved to really be able to train staff up in you know, like in the NURI project you're going to hear about, is that we are working with their staff. We're giving them not only theory, we're giving them a lot of practical tools. And then within the training, and this is one of the things that makes it really unique, is that we do a very extensive community engagement process. So after they learn the theory, we then go in and we model the next phases of the cascade for the teams there. So we're not just sitting in a hotel giving them a bunch of information, and they figure out how that looks in the community. The second part of the training, we literally go into the community and model it by working with them. And Natalie has a great saying with this, and she says, this isn't a workshop, this is a work hard shop. And everybody has to bring their gum boots, not just their shiny shoes, and they come out and we do work together. And we'll show you a little bit more about what that looks like. And so at the end of the training, every training, there's a demonstration site. And that, I think, is also really important, is that we need to, the 3 best ways to actually bring change into a community is demonstration is number 1. Number 2 is just as important as demonstration. And then number 3, which is the most important at all, is demonstration. So that's a unique part of our training. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Nat, for the next slide.
Thanks, Warren. Yeah, when the teams are coming to the trainings and they ask, what should I bring? What should I pack? I say gumboots and Panadols. So it is very practical, and we, Warren and I talk a lot about how building that muscle memory is so imperative for the capacity building components of our teams, and also just there's so much team building. There really are so many externalities in terms of benefits when we do this process. We're engaged as a team of our staff, the community, local leadership, government, farmers. So that sweat equity together is also a really unique and important and special process. When I came to DRC, I really wanted to bring this this level of thinking around regenerative and circular practices, which I've been doing, with our teams in East Africa and in other parts of the world. And the resilience design tool is one of the tools that we use. And as Warren mentioned, building on all of those other regenerative, restorative movements that we've been a part of for years. And so we had the opportunity. I always am trying to push the edge in my agency, and I work with a very enabling environment. So pushing the edge to say, how do we take this to the next level where there are no models, there are no frameworks? How do we necessarily use this process of the principles, bring them forward to a much larger scale? So with the scale team, what we did is thought about how can we design something that might not necessarily be a field guide, but in the direction of helping people to understand what can be done and what is possible to solve for some of these problems that we hear about all the time with climate change, but really shifting the conversation from climate change to land degradation, and for the case of DRC, the land degradation and migration nexus. That's what we, that's our space. So this primer is designed to just help move us in the direction of how do we apply systems-based and holistic thinking towards different types of resilience, building on nature positive solutions as the basis to community resilience. I think shifting the conversation about resilience from economic and livelihoods and financial inclusion to understanding and appreciating that we have to partner with nature at its ecological foundation for our resilience. So we also wanted this primer to serve as a demonstration of how to bring tangible and short-term impacts in brittle and fragile landscapes. Why I say short term, I think there's some, mythology that having nature-based solutions actually takes a really long time. It's a long-term thing. That's not the case. And within one season, we can see benefits when we design and engineer the landscape for biological uplift. So we really wanted to bring science and ecology to the forefront of our design thinking within the humanitarian, recovery, displacement, and development context. So that's what we hope that primer serves. If you go to the next slide, this is something that that's happening within DRC right now. Is we are in a journey of finalizing our new 2025 strategies for the global and regional levels, and I'm just so proud of our agency for really prioritizing bringing these approaches into the work that we do. So how do we take this applied design thinking, bring it into the humanitarian context to build real long-term self-reliance for the communities that we serve, our clients? So looking at, understanding again that resilience, whether it's economic or political stability, food security, look at COVID and all of the, the shutting down of market supply chains. So DRC is, we're moving in this direction of, I would say, even into a leadership role in this space of bringing these regenerative movements and applying them to the work that we do in emergencies, root causes, all of this. So it's not only farm, agriculture, and food security. We're bringing it into also other sectors that I'll touch on the next slide. So yeah, again, it's not only on the farm, it's moving it into also our markets, our economic recovery. How do we bring in what we call circular bioeconomy, that circularity of waste streams into value streams, whether we're doing biodiversity recovery or soil security or our market systems. So this is at DRC, again, borrowing from some of those movements, anchoring very much on permaculture-based design and this whole idea of citizen engineering, where we help to, our teams and our clients sharpen their lens so that they can apply these design solutions and critical thinking skills, whether it's with our shelters, our water sanitation programming, etc., which I'll talk on the next slide. So it does have all of these tenets. And again, the reason that we went with this triad of we can go to the next slide, of hydrology, biology, and geology. It fits really wonderfully with the flow of the presentation that we're going to provide. So here, what I wanted to just stress is the importance of integration and interdisciplinary, interdepartmental, intersectoral working together. So my colleague Chiara Jasna Vaccaro is our head of shelter at the global level. So working with her, or Maria Padelong, who's here as well, who works on our root causes. How can we, how do we collaborate on these design, and how do we optimize one another's efforts to have a much greater impact overall? And the more in a system that we create those junctures of synergy, then the stronger we have resilience, across the board. So again, economic, ecological, climate change, whatever that might be. Next slide. So, for us at DRC, again, it's not only on the farm. In Uganda, we are designing circular markets, taking slaughter waste and human manure, which is human nutrient, flowing that into a biogas system that will be sold back into the market to increase energy security, reduce pressure on reforestation. Our own compounds, we use garden design to mitigate flood pressure on our buildings. That in the right is a photo of Yemen, where we're doing very large-scale groundwater recharge. So water catchment that actively recharges the groundwater levels for irrigation and domestic use. We've got farms, gardens, there's something in between. We kind of call it a farden. And then looking at the landscape, how do we at the landscape level reduce extreme events that are caused by degradation? So, and then of course, under NURI, we are really focused on the infrastructure elements, and then hugely on the biodiversity, tree planting, food forestry establishment. I don't use the term woodlot because that's usually a monocrop. So if we go to the next slide. Those are some examples of how we're taking this into infrastructure, WASH, food security, large scale infrastructure, all this kind of things. So, so now I want to talk about Danida and NURI, and I'm happy to see that some of our colleagues are here from Danida. So Danida and the Danish Embassy in Uganda fund NURI. NURI is the Northern Uganda Resilience Initiative, from a 3-year program, and it's one of 3 programs under a larger initiative called Upside, which is an initiative of the Danish Embassy in Uganda that's really focused on economic recovery, private sector support, support to farmers, but our role in that, NURI is kind of a two-headed monster, friendly monster. For DRC, we handle, our remit is water resources management, and that is where we're doing a lot of the work that we'll talk about in the presentation. Rural access roads. I've been in East Africa 17 years, and here, when the rains come onto a dirt road, you can forget about accessing market or many other things. So the rural access roads is a part of what we're doing as well. And then the other head of NURI is climate smart agriculture, which is implemented through a group called AFARC. So the NURI program is focused on sub-catchment level planning, really with authorities and communities. So we move in stride as sort of a one team approach. Danita, DRC, community members, local government and authorities, as well as their technical departments and engineers who also join into our trainings. So, again, market access roads, establishing a more resilient infrastructure. And so what I wanted to do is ensure that we're applying this kind of lens and thinking to the program, and bringing in different tools. We have the resilience design. Warren comes and supports us, and then of course I have my own. I support the team directly on this as well. So next slide. So what is a sponge village? When I came up with this name, I was just thinking, how can we really get people to envision what we're trying to accomplish? Here in East Africa, we have a lot of aridity, right? Arid conditions are when evaporation is higher than the rate of precipitation. That's increasing here in East Africa for a variety of reasons, but a lot of it is because of land degradation. And the good news is that that is something that we can control, and we can make interventions at a local or subcatchment or even the bioregional level. So I'm really looking forward to shifting the conversation away from the sort of hopeless climate change thing that's very real and daunting, but what can we do on the ground? So a sponge village is a village that soaks up energy and resources flowing through it and stores them for the long-term productivity for resilience of the land, the people, the soil, the animals, the livelihoods, all of that. Water is the essential foundation of all of that. So if, in the absence of this, water is just flowing through, ripping soil away, accumulating with other waters, having a flood party. And so what we want to do is mimic the natural infrastructure of the ecology to get that water to stay in place. Keep in mind that in a forest, 90% of that water actually stays in the forest. It doesn't run away. So we can go to the next slide. Now, under the NURI program, we are doing a lot of different projects, as I mentioned, roads, water points, spring protection. But here we had the chance to really demonstrate something special, bringing all of that together. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Warren, and you can walk us through how we start with engaging the community on our trainings. Thanks.
Yeah, wonderful, Natalie. Thank you. And yeah, I love that thought of how a training engages the community, because so often we think of trainings as separate from the community. And so we build on the relationships that the agency already has with the community. So NURI has been working with multiple communities long before we get there, oftentimes before we get there for a training. And so when we come in, I have to also acknowledge that we're coming in under the auspice of already a developed relationship. And so when the training starts and we start the engagement in the community, we do some different types of engagements that a lot of community members in different programs have shared with us that they have not had that level of engagement in the past, where we come in and we do a big portion of that process being a listening process with them. So we sit with them and we listen to them about, we ask them basically, what is their story of place? And that idea is about looking at the past, looking at the present, looking at the future. So we say, what was this like in the time of your grandparents? What was this like? What was the land like here? And in a lot of the DRC programs and a lot of the BHA programs, we're doing these trainings, you get a similar answer where they talk about this place had trees. And when the trees were there, we had better water sources. Water was coming from up in the landscape rather than us having to get it at the bottom of the landscape where it's polluted. And they talk about having a lot more food. They talked about having stability of forage. They had no flooding, no drought. Generally, the buffers of drought and flooding were held by the forest. Like Natalie was saying, it's like holding that energy over the long term. And then we ask them, well, what's it like now? And we look out and in these landscapes that are heavily eroded, and the trees have been removed and the vegetation has been minimized, and a lot of the agricultural practices have actually exacerbated those issues in the land. And so you see the agriculture contributing to the land degradation. And you start to see this whole other story develop of disease, of poverty, that coincides with the loss of the ecological services that the intact environment had provided for them over many, many, many years. And so at that place, we then turn the story to what do they want for the future, not just for themselves, but also their grandchildren. And even in a refugee context, that becomes a really important part of the story of what do they want when they get home to where they're going back to, or they're hoping to get back to, and how we link the health of them and their family and their future generations to that of the landscape being in health as well. So we really can see from their stories that they're wanting to have that stability that had been there in the past. And so then we step into this saying, we can help you with that. So we're not coming in and saying, we're just going to do this. We're saying, here, these tools we're bringing into this training and our long-term relationship with you is that are tools that will help you meet your goals to have that type of ecological stability that gives you income, that gives you nutrition, that gives you healthy water, that buffers extreme climate issues. And then we wrap all of that with basically we honor their local wisdom. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And looking at that, we do a process by which we do a community, what we call a community resource walk, where they guide us into the community. We look at what resources are there, because real resilience design is based on using only local resources, not bringing in different fertilizers and chemicals from other places or other resources that need to be bought in. We find if you do that, it's harder to have it replicated, as well as there's other ecological downsides to that as well. So we're looking for what are the local resources that are in their community, and they have so much wisdom about what is there. Even people in refugee camps who aren't from that area have a lot of knowledge of place. And so we draw that out, and then we start to look at how much resources are in their community. And they're often surprised at that, because they've been told that they have nothing over and over again. The NGOs are like, you have nothing, here is this. You can have, these things that we bring to you. And what we're saying is, no, let's look through the pattern eye for those things that can actually be integrated into our systems. And so we spend a lot of time here, and we have a lot of people come up to us after this saying, this is the first time that we've had an NGO in years and years and years actually ask us what we know. And I think it's a really important part of our process of engaging them. And then we start this process together where we build the tools we need. We demonstrate on even a square meter how water moves over a landscape, and the things that we can do to hold it in for our farms and for our homes to actually have higher production. And so that community engagement process is an essential part of the resilience design process, because you can have really good science and the strategies that go with that science, but if you don't have really good community integration skills, then it's not, the chances of it being picked up and understood by the community, and better yet, replicated by the community, are very slim. So we spend a lot of time in this part of it, and we talk with the staff at the different agencies about this being a really important part of how the cascade process happens, that it can't be skipped. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Natalie, to talk a little bit about the design.
Great, thanks, Warren. As this next slide comes up, the way that we flowed this presentation actually works great, because Warren talked about geology, hydrology, and biology, and I'm going to walk us through the design where we are modifying the geology. Then Warren's going to cover water security and the retention and infiltration structures that we've made, which is the hydrology, and then we'll end with the biology, which is the food diversity, the biodiversity. So this is Warren. This slide is again just showing, Warren's point was so important about just sensitizing people to the resources that they have all around us. For those of you who know about my apartment that I live in, I compost with earthworms, I grow mushrooms, spirulina, beehives, balcony gardens, just from my waste. So that same mentality is so empowering for communities when they realize, wow, we're loaded. We have a lot of wealth. We have carbon and nitrogen and water flows. I also want to just point out that we don't lack water in East Africa. We have more water that falls and lands that can possibly be put to use, regardless of the use or industry. What we lack is design, capture, storage. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to just take us quickly through the design. So the next slide, the design, after that initial discussion with the community, then we put on our gumboots and our hiking boots and our insect repellent, and we start marching into the bush with the community and really hear from them. They become our tour guides of the problems and challenges and resources and opportunities. So here we arrive to Atego village. This is not to scale, just want to clarify. So the community led us on a walking tour and site assessment. And so immediately some of these things started to become apparent. First, they talked about the water that would come pummeling down the road. We noticed that there was a big cattle crawl where they keep their animals at night, and that really starts to get loaded with manure. Obviously, there's a little village that's nearby the road. But as we started to go through this thicket with pangas and chopping our way through, we started to see that there are a lot of tree stumps, major evidence of deforestation. And again, that's the gravity infrastructure. We saw a lot of charcoal pits, which is, that's how humans have been getting domestic fuel for millennia. We also heard from them and saw with our own eyes the water path and erosion scars that were deepening and deepening as big rivets in the community. So we did see that the ground is brittle, it's just drier, the absorptive capacity is quite low, and in the valley on the left is where the flooding would reach to a height that it would actually cut off access from this side of the valley to a neighboring village, and they would have to go around up the top of the mountain. So it's quite disruptive as these extreme behaviors start to set in. So if we go to the next one. Klaus, I think I'm about to answer a question. So this is just one of the many tools and apps that we use, but really we're working with our teams and the community to help train their eyes on a few things: solar orientation, wind direction, slope. So I always talk about the three thieves of water. The three thieves are sun, wind, and slope or gravity. Those are the things that will roll it away, evaporate it, blow it away. So the whole approach is an anti-gravity movement where we're trying to mitigate for these. So as we're marching through, our eyes are looking at how can we design this space so that we are mitigating the risks and optimizing the opportunities. If we go to the next slide. So Klaus, this community, by the way, they hold livestock. I think there's another slide before this. If we go to the one that shows the whole village and the interventions, if we could just go to that slide. So, this community, thank you. This community are livestock holders, and there's only one nearby water point. And, for Klaus and Maria, who deal with sort of root causes and conflict, as well as all of the other guests, here's a community that have their traditional livelihood strategy is pegged to livestock. So that water resource and that watering point is a point where other communities also meet on a, daily basis. And as the water, availability goes up and down around that point, that's when community tensions can start to arise, right? So understanding and hearing from the community how it used to be, what they would like it for it to look like in the future, we got to work with the community on the design. So this is the overall design, and it's what I call a fill and spill system. So starting at the very top, when you get out of the shower, you don't dry your feet first, you start with your head. Same with the mountains. So we want to catch water as high up in the landscape as possible. This is really unique because all over the world, people think, well, water is going to roll downhill, let's catch it downhill. Not only is that not, you lose the infiltrative opportunity of that water when it's already down on the ground, on the low point in the sump. But you lose opportunities for gravity-fed systems and irrigation. And so the premise of this training and design was to create an interconnected fill and spill circuit or network of structures that capture water and direct it in a managed way from one point to the next to the next. So one of the things we did is had a catchment drain that was a 2% drain that fed into bioswales on contour, okay? So working with the natural patterns of the land is paramount here. That's what we're trying to do. Extract and understand the natural contours and patterns and leverage those for our design. Nature is a moving bus. We want to jump onto that bus. So a few things that we did here is, try to get that water into a series of swales that would fill up, spill, fill up, spill, fill up, spill, and then finally make their way down the original path. Now, what I want to point out is that water will always go downhill, and we want that to happen inside of the soil. That's what we call green water. And so this system actually interlinks two different main functions. One is infiltration. We want the water to deeply soak and hydrate and quench those thirsty, brittle soils, while also reserving some water as surface retention systems, as ponds, so that those can be accessed for irrigation, for fish, livelihoods, livestock watering, and domestic use. So when we talk about sponge, the point is, how do we design this landscape so that it really can just drink and hydrate? We've created throats in the landscape so that that water will drink and drink and drink deep into the soils. Now, we did this training in December. Already we've had significant feedback. We've had some major rain events, and one of the tenets of permaculture is observe feedback and do adaptive management. So a couple of the learnings that we've already had here is that not only does the system work and the community is already becoming a sponge, but in some cases we had an unanticipated high level of success, to the point that the water is hydrating the soil so much that in a couple of places, like the toilet, water started to come up through the toilets, so we could see down in the latrines, and then residual water damage and flows that have had an impact on some of the homes. So we've had a lot of learnings here. One other very interesting one is that one of the feedback from the community is there was one gentleman who said his house is much cooler now, because it was, as that water, it was not far from one of the swales, started to seep towards his home, and the earth and home started to have a bit of residual moisture. It created natural air conditioning. That wasn't intentional, but already we're applying that learning as something to either avoid or apply, because not all people mind air conditioning in the space. So here is a point about geology. We've got the earthworks, the swales, the dams. We have the valley dam that's very up at the very, very top. And then this big dam that we call the contour dam. All of that water comes through the system, lands in the contour dam. When that fills up, it goes on its merry way towards this, my favorite dam, the little hand dug dam. And then it continues back through a big rock armored spillway, and then just pours down a series of gully plugging check dams that we made both with stone and bamboo, and goes on its way, on its original pathway. The road water, we also harvested that through a swale into the community that links to the permagarden. There's no reason why a community should be suffering from drought conditions and lack of water, and at the same time watch a road carry nutrient-rich rainwater and nitrogen-rich rainwater away from the community. So here we want to link that. If we go to the next slide. So this is what we would talk about, the geology. Oh, sorry, it's okay, we can stay on this slide, but we also did FMNR, or Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration. You can go on to the next slide, that's fine. Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration is a way of, sorry, back up once, is a way of pruning trees so that they really get a biological uplift. We also established food forests. If you look at those little blue dots, we call them smile berms, because they look like smiles. And so here we also were integrating the biology. So treed systems, making the existing trees healthier. And one of the feedbacks also that we received is that the trees and vegetation surrounding these earthworks have already been impacted. positively. They have much more vitality and, you know, just look very, very healthy. So if we go on now to the next slide. So this is not to scale. This one is to scale. So this is an actual aerial view of most of the system. What's not featured here is the Valley Dam, which is up at the top. So this just gives you another perspective of how these things are interconnected and linked in a circuit to hydrate and infiltrate into this village so that rangeland grasses are more viable, perennial plants and trees are much more viable. They do honey keeping here. And then of course, food systems also will be more viable, not only because of the irrigation, but the residual green water inside the soil. Next slide. So this is just what that looks like on the ground, not some funny doodles of mine. So, you know, these are images from the site after a rain. So what you can see is that the bioswales become just sort of, not a lazy river, but they are long, skinny, temporary ponds that just slow the heck down. We want water to slow down because when it's fast, it's incisive and it has destructive energy. We want to pull that destructive energy out of the water by pacifying it on contours so it can slowly seep and sink deep into the soils and then continue its way downhill. But I think Warren says that it's, you know, water can move 6 meters in 1 second on top, you know, in a major rain event across a barren, you know, landscape, but it can move those same 6 meters in 1 year when it's doing that through those interstitial tiny little spaces between the soil, and it's just seeping down slowly and activating and feeding life everywhere it goes. Don't forget, where water accumulates, life generates, and that's what this is about, is how do we bring back life to this landscape so it can feed the people, the biology, the animals on this site. Next slide. Okay, so I've highlighted a couple of those water structures, and Warren's going to go into detail on the individual structures. Thanks, Warren.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide, please, Suzanne. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just some of the structures we did. We had different scales of intervention that we look at when we're looking at a larger landscape, and there are certain key places that we can do interventions with larger equipment that have a huge leverage potential in helping to rebuild the hydrology of that landscape. And so some of these structures that we use these larger equipment from, yes, they're more costly. Yes, they wouldn't be able to be replicated by the community without the same level of resources. But what it does is that it does an intervention that allows for the whole system to slow down, and then the interstitially between these larger mechanized systems, we can then work for generations with many, many smaller structures that are done by hand. We used cash for work component in here that helped us to develop some of these other structures. So this one is the typical type of valley dam you see, but what we did is we did it high in the landscape, and then we extended its catchment using a paired bioswale system. So a lot of times we think of the valley dams have to be at the bottom of the system where they're the most vulnerable to being eroded and damaged by big flooding. And in my years of doing consulting work, I have come across so many valley dams that have just been blown out and aren't being used anymore because they were poorly placed low in the landscape. So what we tried to do here is high up where it could be utilized by the village, so all of the sponging would start to benefit the village itself. Next slide, please. So there are different styles of dams we're doing. Some people may have never heard of a contour dam or even ridge dam. So I wanted to bring this up because it's usually not the place people are looking to put a dam, because they say, oh, well, it's not a valley. Where would the water come from? So what we do is, again, we use bioswales to extend the catchment out to increase its watershed, collecting the area that we're collecting water for that dam. And then what the placement of it being on the contour means it's not in the valley in a big storm. So you're not getting the pressures on the dam that you would normally get. And the other benefit that we see is that oftentimes a contour dam can be located closer to where it's needed, and in a drier part of the landscape. And so just like here, you can see the dam before as we were building it, and then you can see the inset with it being filled. This is next to the community, which has provided the infiltration that's now slowly going down and out through this, is now providing really productive growing areas. It's also providing domestic water needs right close to the village, where the valley was much further away. Next slide, please. And this is Natalie's favorite. She talks about the hand dug dam. So we also modeled how they could make their own dam with just hand labor, because we did have the big equipment there, but we also like to model what could be done if you don't have big equipment. And this was located in a place that is near some of the key animal trails so that they could use it for watering. When we got there, there was very few places that in the dry season where they could actually access water. And even in the rainy season, there wasn't places where it was collecting and staying. So it was causing a lot of conflict with them and their neighbors. So we put in 3 different dams into the system, and they were, the 2 bottom dams were also linked together with spillways, brought the water back out to its original outflow. Next slide, please. And then we, being that NURI is a program that is working with road infrastructure and markets, one of the things we were looking at is how to take the water that comes off the hardscape of roads and the nutrient that is on that road and put it out into production. Right now, when you have most road engineers in the world will go about 2 meters off the road with their drainages, and then they're no longer responsible for the water, and they cause a lot of damage. And one of the things I really appreciate about NURI is that they're saying, no, let's turn this into a resource. And what that does also helps to reduce the pressures on the road itself, so that there's less need for repairs over the long term in the maintenance. I'm going to hand it back to you, Nat, for this next piece. I know we only have about eight or 9 minutes, so take it over.
Well, we're going for it. All right. So the last part, which is that biology piece, is what I'm going to talk about. So if we go into the next slide, one of the first things that we heard from the community was, we used to go with our animals and we knew the fruits and and the plants and trees, and we always, those kind of old friends that we never see anymore. And that was our medicine. We always could, grab something or pick something and munch on it. And so that loss of heritage and nutrition security, let alone the ecological impact of the loss of that biodiversity, that goes into cultural loss and the stability of that cultural fabric. And so that was something we really heard from them. We, under NURI and across DRC, increasingly, we are establishing food forests. And for me, I always want to anchor those with indigenous food forestry, not only because there's a scientific reason to do that, and the fact that, that biology feeds the soil microbiology, and there's a soil chemistry relationship with the historic vegetation on that landscape. So we, they're trying to feed bees and all these things. So having food forests that provide perennial stability in the landscape, those are like the life support system for annual crops, flood proofing, drought proofing. We need that shade, mulch, organic matter, biomass. So when we establish the food forests, we very much want to anchor them on indigenous local species, but we also want food security, nutrition security, and we talk about a number of F's: food, fodder for animals as well as pollinators. So food, fodder, fiber, which can be everything from baskets to houses to you name it. Food, fodder, fiber, fuel, And that can be, you know, biogas, that can be charcoal, that can be whatever that might be. Food, fodder, fiber, fuel, fertility, and as in soil fertility, as well as pharmaceuticals with an F. So all of those things, as well as, you know, looking at what are some market crops? How do we integrate not only for the family and the home and the landscape, but now also looking at market crops that can be linked to livelihoods. Next slide. And so in a food forest, there are different layers. You have tall things, you have short things, shorter things, crawling things, creeping things, climbing things, all of those things. You know, really what we're doing is we are mimicking natural systems. I always kind of laugh, Warren, when people say, well, is this scalable? Well, yes, to the planetary level, right? Our planetary system is a living biome that models this. We are just trying to mimic this for our survival and the health of our landscapes. Terraforming, that's right, Jen. So, you know, for us looking at a natural forest, that's why I don't want us to be focusing on woodlots. That can actually be degenerative and contribute to the degrading of land and the flood and extreme events that come with that. So what we do is we, again, using the natural contours of the land, we design systems. So this, for example, is one individual tree, what we call smile berm. You can call them half moons, media luna, whatever you would like. We call them smile berms because that's happy and fun. But every single tree has its own water harvesting structure, right? So water comes pummeling downhill. It gets caught in that reservoir, which we also pack with a bunch of materials. And then any overflow pops back out and goes down to the next system, next. So we design them on a fish scale pattern. So the overflow goes from one to the next. And that way we are reducing the water pressure and velocity and volumes that contribute to flood events, you know, because a flood is really just a joining up of all these water friends and having a big flood party. So we want them to, everybody calm down, stay in the landscape and feed the living soil. So we don't want to focus on tree planting. We want to focus on tree growing, and those are different things. So this is the way that we do it. Okay, next slide. What we did, as Warren explained, is we pulled that water off of the road, which actually leads to the Nile River, which is so swollen in the rains that it, you know, ferries can't pass, and that's an economic corridor that gets disrupted. So what we did is directed that water into a permaculture garden. And I won't go too much into that right now, but a permaculture garden can have a few things. Number one, a passive water harvesting structure. So we do bioswales, soil building and protection from chemicals and erosion, lots of diversity, agrobiodiversity, nutrient diversity. It's anchored with a lot of perennial stability and food forestry where there's space. And we also want to make sure it's a three-dimensional garden and vertical, not only on the ground, but trellises and trees and different structures, fence lines, water towers. So we want to create microclimate and habitat for different plants that might like different climate and microclimate, but also all of those little people like the pollinators, the predators that we need in our system to help mitigate the harm to crops and to help build fertility and seed saving. So again, in this particular garden, within DRC, we only promote organic, no chemicals. We really try to not use GMO modified improved seeds, because what we heard from people is they're losing their food heritage, and we want to ensure that they can save seeds over and over and over again. So if we go to the next slide. So here's just some more images about how we took that water off of the road and linked it into the garden. So it will passively just flow and fill up those swales, which will fill and spill and fill and spill until their exit point. And on the right-hand side is what it looks like, where that joining point is between that swale that goes through the community and then pours into the garden. Next slide. So this is just another view of the garden. So again, setting up first the infrastructure. What we talk about first, which comes, I think, from Brad Lancaster, is planting the rain. Before we plant any crops, That's right, you heard me well. We plan to the rain. So we get the infrastructure first so that we can passively harvest water and nutrients that are flowing through. We cover it with a trellis, which protects that moisture, but also increases the growing space. So if we go to the next one. And then parallel, what you can't see here is parallel to, I think are we going to the next slide? Parallel to those bioswales on contour, we create these double dug beds that are on contour as well, parallel to those swales, and we dig them about 80 centimeters deep, and we pack them full of all those materials that we identified early doing the community resource walk. So we have teams that are running and going to get more mulch or carbon or leaves or manure or charcoal dust or all of that stuff. We pack all that in there, and now because the roots don't have to compete with one another because there's so much fertility, we can plant super intensively, and those crops become their own cover crop. So it's awesome. But again, really focusing on seed sovereignty, ensuring that we're providing seeds that can be saved again and again, which have been locally adapted, locally improved for hundreds and thousands of years. These are the traditional foods of the community. And so as a foundation, we want to make sure that they have that heritage security as well as the nutrition security. Next slide. Okay, so what I just wanted to land on is, at my agency, DRC, and in many other agencies, again, Chiara is here, our WASH and Infrastructure and Shelter Global Advisor. And, we are trying to create water security for communities. And oftentimes what that means is that rather than focusing on the primary water, which is rainwater, or secondary water, which is surface water retention, we go straight to the last resort. And that last resort is the tertiary water system, which is supposed to be infiltrating and percolating down through the biology that we've removed. So what many people don't realize is that by using design and these principles of passive water harvesting, what we can do, and we can go to the next slide, is actually recharge groundwater systems. If I was president of the world or a donor or a head of an agency, I would make sure that we never allow groundwater to be pumped without an active ecological recharge plan where it's possible. I'm not talking about deep, deep, deep wells where we're pumping fossil waters out of the ground, but in many cases, and what we are doing under NURI as part of our water resources management is actively recharging boreholes, springs. And so here's one example of one of the springs that we are recharging. So there is the protection of it with a spring box, so that spring, has the concrete protection around it and a collection point. But up above that, we again harvested water off of the road, carried that contour around the top of the where that spring eye is, and what you can see in there is an entire little tiny baby food forest with those smile berms. So we've taken the geology and the earthworks to catch that hydrology, and we've activated that biology through those trees. All that water is now going to seep, rather than just running down and taking soil with it, it's going to soak. And this spring, Warren, you're going to have to help me remember, I think it took 30 minutes to fill one single jerry can. It used to be a tiny little muddy trickle. It took 30 minutes to fill one 20-liter jerry can. After this intervention, after just one season of rain, we were able to increase the quality and the volumes of water. And now women have to only wait 1 minute and 30 seconds to fill that same exact 20 liters of jerry can. So, and this is a place where initially women would have to go to water that was shared. They would dig down into the riverbed, into a big muddy pit where cows were standing around and manuring. And they said that they would have to take that muddy, filthy water, take it home, wait for it to settle, which it never really settles. And they had so many stomach ailments and parasites, and they were really gleeful, if I can say gleeful, that this clean water is constantly trickling out of the spring eye. Also, what you'll see here is the overflow, because you can't turn off that tap, it's so much water. It is just directed into an overflow dam. So now, just by virtue of recharging the spring, we now have a livestock watering point, we now have irrigation and fish opportunities. Jan was asking about disease. There are water ferns, there are fish, there are different ways we can mitigate that mosquito concern. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone in the world understands that spring recharge, borehole recharge is possible, and it should be mandatory. So I think that's probably the last slide. If you want to just go to the next slide in terms of our presentation. Oh, so yes, of course, we've had a lot of learnings. So this can be more of a discussion, but for me, we can go to the next slide to talk about some of the key learnings about this process. So I think from our perspective, we really want, me, Warren, DRC, Scale, the whole point is how do we now move this to the next level? And so I want to focus, first of all, and really give major kudos to Danita, because I think the partnership with DRC Uganda and Danita has almost felt like a one-team approach, where it's a partnership, it's collaborative. And so I think that as these spaces open up, it's Danita really that kind of creates these spaces to say, all right, we're okay to test and trial some of these ideas and see where it goes. So I would say strong donor partnership, especially right now when we're all looking for solutions for climate action, are really, really, really key. Number two, knowledge is the main input. I know Klaus and Jan, are really questioning, well, how do you roll this out? What are the mechanics of that? It's tough. We're talking about software, not hardware. We can take any, go to any place and make a local A-frame to measure the contours and identify all the waste streams and things that can go into soil building. But that training on the critical thinking, the design, the process-based interventions, it does take time. And so tools, trainings, the software of it is really where it's at. We are not bringing in, inputs from outside. In fact, let's leave that out of this conversation. We want communities to just be able to be fully self-reliant with organic, nutritious foods and resilience to extreme events. So point number three, integration of sectors. The greater the integration, the greater the propensity for systemic resilience to various shocks and stresses. So identifying those synergistic relationships. I have my colleagues here who focus on root causes, on WASH, on conflict and peace building. Let's have a collective conversation, because we all may have a role in this vision and this picture and the rollout, and can support one another and be ambassadors of one another's approach towards this work. Another point is partnering with science. And NURI, for example, is a great example where we have civil engineers, senior civil engineers, but they're working on infrastructure, hard infrastructure. So we have to bring in a scientific level, the biology, the ecology, the soil microbiology. So either we have to hire, there's a few ways to do that. We either all have to sort of increase our collective understanding and literacy around our carbon literacy, our hydro literacy, our soil literacy. Do we even know what those functions are, and how we and our efforts and programs are impacting that? So we've got to either partner with science, or become scientists, or budget for science, or partner with institutions, but we have to be scientists. Governance, of course, we can't do anything. I think Jan was asking about the process, and also Klaus. So local authorship of the site and the system is the only way forward. You will not succeed with anything unless you have full engagement and participation. So lastly, adaptive management. As I already mentioned, already from the Sponge Village, we've had a lot of feedback, and a couple places where we're actively right now focusing on some adjustments and adapting and modifying the design, and making sure that there are not going to be weak points. And then evidence and communication. I think events like this, the learning events, the primer, being able to share out the evidence, but also I think there's a nuance in, we work for a protection agency for refugees. How do we factor in soil pH into our reporting and our M&E? So those systems-based tools, I know Tufts has one, Africa Women Rising did a great impact assessment, but how do we go to the next level so that we can focus on a bioregional level, the watershed level, and bring real resilience to ecological degradation? Because most of the disasters that we are facing right now in East Africa are not because of climate change. They are very much so because of the ecological collapse of the landscape here. So I think that is my final point, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Nat. Thank you, Warren. I know we have a number of great questions in the chat box. I'm going to spotlight a few of those, and then I welcome people to continue to put them into the chat or signal to me if you'd like to ask a question out loud as well. I'm going to start here with a question that Jan raised right at the very beginning. And he notes that while that he's sure while the project is being implemented by partners that we can continue to see these great results. But what happens after the partner is no longer there implementing it? How many of the practices are continued and sustained by the communities? So I'm wondering, Warren, maybe you could share some reflections around the sustainable uptake of practices, what it takes and what you've seen so far.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. And thanks for the question, Jan. I wanted to bring up a lot of observations that we've had with post-program intervention and what has happened with the resilience design systems. And one of the things we've seen, which I think is really interesting, is where we have structured the rainwater harvesting, the nutrient harvesting in the landscape in a passive way and partnered those systems with perennials. That's where we see the highest level of long-term uptake, is where the system is stabilized and can continue growing even without a lot of input. So that's one place we've seen a lot of benefits. Another is the working at the scale of the household. So we start, part of the uniqueness of the training is we start with the permagarden training right at the household level, where we do these biointensive gardens that can literally be like with DRC and Somalia, when we were there and 40-degree weather in the dry season, we got a garden going and they were eating from that garden amaranth greens within 3 weeks. And so we have this immediate turnaround of benefit for them, and the structure of that system, as long as they're a part of how you build it and how to tend it, we find the things that actually produce yields they'll maintain longer into the future. So those two things, so the things that are that can give them yields and that they'll keep it going, to the structures that are passively harvesting water and have perennials on it, and that becomes an important part of, like, most ag systems I see are all annuals. They're all based on a large amount of input each year to be able to get that system up and running. And so one of the things we're doing at scale, also I know DRC is looking at this as well, is how to work with market farming and structuring a lot of the market farm to have not only the annuals that you typically see, but also how we develop perennial stability in both nutrition and income. Hopefully that answers a little bit. I don't know, Nat, if you had a little to add to that.
So, I mean, we're doing this at many different scales. I fear, one thing I really want people to not take away is that this is just one big, large landscape level intervention. Again, we're doing this at shelters, individual shelters, homes, camps, markets. So again, the strength of having a principle-based and process-based process is that you do have a toolkit. So it's a formula. For example, the West Sun. The West Sun sets in the west all over the place, and it's the hottest, most intense sun of the day. So west proofing, that protecting your shelter, your crops from that west sun, those are the kinds of the tidbits, the design thinking that, regardless, my background is urban and regional planning. So, regardless of the scale, this can be applied to really so much of everything that we do, including our own compounds and our offices in Dadaab. We're tapping the air conditioners and diverting that drip water from ACs into bananas. So I really want people to not just think about this as like a specific set of actions that can only be applied at this scale or this level. It's not only about food and agriculture, it can be about architecture. So yeah. Okay, sorry, I thought there was another question.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Nat. And I know that question came up as well, that yes, in Otago, I think it was kind of the whole kit and caboodle, that it was a really like large transformation. But I know, the example of the permagarden, for instance, can be applied, I think, as it was in Dadaab, as African Women Rising has been doing it in refugee camps, even at small, very small scales as well. So that start small and simple principle also applies here. I wanted to pivot over to the question of achieving scale and thinking about the cascading and the transfer of knowledge, which I know you talked about some, Nat, but I think that it might warrant a bit more reflection on the kind of principles that you've been using to, I'm looking at Klaus's question, whether training local trainers, play it forward, strengthening local authorities' capacity, the donor angle, donor sustainability requirements. What are the different pieces of the puzzle that allow for this to roll out at scale?
Yes, 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 and yes. So, the capacity. So first of all, I am like a heat-seeking missile for champions, right? If I even suspect that someone is a champion, I want their WhatsApp number, So really identifying the champions, whether that's within the community, whether that's within the local government, whether that's within the agency, it's how are we creating that enabling environment? I know Warren turned his camera on to say demonstration, demonstration, demonstration. So people are not going to buy into something that is not a great model. And some of the things we do, there's such a mind-blowing biological uplift that people immediately want that. So demonstration is key. Building capacity of local teams, I think, is key. I think also I just want to shout out to the localization movement right now. Agencies worldwide are really trying to make an effort to localize, and that means strengthening capacity within our region, with national staff. I think that's really, really important. I think a mentorship program to make sure that we don't have brain drain, if we really invest in staff and teams, how do we cascade that down? Obviously, there's a TOT. I think that with our programs, another, not challenge, but consideration is the amount of energy and oversight to be coming back every week, giving feedback, working with the community, just to have regular oversight. You cannot do what we have learned really well is you can't just do a one-off training and step away, right? There has to be a plan. There have to be real actions that are tangible, follow up. But I think at the government level, these kinds of importance, and I'd love to hear from some of the donor landscape is, these kinds of learning events, shared learning dialogues. I don't know that we do, we do enough of them, but are we finding those hard-hitting projects and examples? The really flagship things, I think, like the Sponge Village and Nuri in general. So
I think another, just to add on to that, Natalie, one of the things we found within Scale is how to maintain technical viability through a cascading process. And so one of the things that we did is we developed a set of minimum standards and a checklist program that could be used in the field, in the training, where we can actually go back through with the trainers. Did we meet the minimum standards ecologically here? Not just like, did the training happen? Check. And then people say, okay, we did what we were supposed to do. It's like, no, did the training, was the water, did we reticulate the water and slow it down in the landscape? Is there a certain level of biodiversity? Is the soil building processes intact? And that becomes part of every training for it to move to the next level of cascading. And like Natalie said, there's a component of mentoring and modeling that I think is really important that doesn't happen in a lot of cascade processes. And that's something else also in Scale that we're addressing and starting to look at how we can support the cascade process of this, starting with the home garden all the way out to the watershed level, and then through many watersheds.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Warren and Nat. I just saw an interesting question coming in from Maria that I wanted to make sure that we have time to respond to as well. She mentions that when we talked about Story of Place, she was reminded of processes for community safety planning, also highly participatory, drawing on community's knowledge and vision for change. So Maria asked, do you think it could be possible in places marked by conflict and climate-related fragility to also integrate these community processes? and it notes that community-driven development also hinges on a similar type of process. So yeah, what does this look like in a conflict or fragile environment? How do you adapt?
So, again, because this is a principle-based thing, I think, it's very context specific. It can be applied to any context where we are. So Maria is my colleague at our headquarters, and I have, I would love for us to work on what I call from fragility to fertility, because, that's not only the landscape, but the community. And, Warren and I talk about this a lot, is that so many of the problems that we have around migration and displacement and conflict starts with soil, right? That is the survival base. It is the foundation of all of our livelihoods, our food, our peace and stability. So yes, Maria, for sure, there are so many opportunities to look at, how do we go into landscapes that that really are conflict ridden, and is this a, can long-term water security be a peace dividend? I know there was a question about cash or about labor intensive. So we actually do a lot of labor intensive work. This training, we had 6 machines and about 170 people. So we had a lot of, I know we've got different colleagues here, but cash for work programming, cash-based interventions, I think there are huge opportunities here. But in terms of the process, absolutely. I mean, the question is that we ask, what is the story of place? We are not experts here. I don't know what it takes to walk from South Sudan to Uganda. I don't know how to do that. That's experiential capital that we have to honor and celebrate that people have. And so whatever that is with the dynamics, there are a lot of invisible things that you walk in, that you walk into a community, and if you don't have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, you can really cause a problem. So no, absolutely, Maria, we want to harvest that knowledge. We want everything that we do that's directly responsive to communities, their struggles, their challenges, the potential for conflict, and see, can we leverage these types of design interventions to, to bring stability in many layers to the community. Kristen, you're on mute. I just also wanted to, I know we're going to continue with question and answer, but I would really love if, I think Rila is still on our call. Rila is from Dunedin in Uganda, and I just would love if Rila is still with us, if she just may want to offer some thoughts on the partnership. And then also we have Jean-Christophe here, who's our country director from Uganda, and I just want to make sure that if they want to comment on anything, because maybe I'm totally off the mark on everything.
Maybe Rila first.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Faintly, you're quite faint, Rila.
Okay, is that better?
Affirmative.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'm both on my laptop and my phone. I'm not quite sure which one's working best.
One of
But yeah, what can I say? I mean, I think the collaboration has been really, really important. I can see in the Nuri team, this the work with resilience design started in the more in the rural infrastructure part of the program, and it's the team on climate smart agriculture got really excited and really wanted to be a part of it. And as there are definitely champions in our team who've taken it and run with it, and we're sort of picking things up and taking them forward in other parts. And I mean, there's just an energy and an excitement about this that is quite remarkable, and I'm sure that comes partly from the energy and that Warren and Natalie have brought to it. I mean, it's really been amazing, but also from the results that are there, the community get really excited and they can see the sense of it even before you start to see any results. There's a kind of logic and in it that normal people can see. Oh my God, this makes sense. This is what we should be doing. So there's it's been a real pleasure to work with it, and I think across the program there's a real excitement, and people are seeing new opportunities that that were always there, but somehow it sort of makes you take a step back and look at the landscape, and yeah, which in a way that we haven't done before. So it's been a great experience and a huge learning and a real empowerment and a real sort of democratic process as well, because there's room for everybody's ideas and thinking and enthusiasm. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rila. And also the protection of the investment from Danita. You know, by applying this design lens to rural roads, we're keeping roads drier. That means we don't have to grade them again in 2 years' time, right? So I think protecting that investment, you know, if nothing else, if you hate trees and you hate nature and you're happy that climate change is happening, you know, but your roads, you know, you're an investor in roads and private sector infrastructure and market access, that should be reason enough. Is, you know, the millions of dollars, again, my background in urban planning, and Chiara, you know, as an architect, the millions of dollars that go into infrastructure, and we are going to have more risks. We will see more extreme behavior and weather events and water events. And, you know, the infrastructure has to be more resilient. It just does, right? And if we don't do that, then we're just, we might as well put our dollar bills or Danish krona at right on top and let it flow down the floodwaters. So I think that in and of itself is a really important thing. I dropped a link into the first NEBI training where that water was totally impassable on that road. And we literally, like, I felt like we picked up the flood and just moved it and like nestled it into Gabriel's land, where now they have fish and bananas and tomatoes and construction, water for construction. One guy, young guy, built a second house. He's looking for a new wife. So there's so many stories, you know, around that. But the main point there is that the road remains passable. Within a rain, 2 days later, you don't see any evidence that it's rained. You just see a big swollen dam that's ready, you know, for household and animal use.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nat. And unfortunately, I can see that we are coming up right at time here with just a couple minutes left. So I wanted to hand over to Warren and then you, Nat, for some final thoughts. And I was curious, Suzanne, if you could also pull up the contact, the last slide that has some contact info, because I know there's definitely an appetite to continue this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, and just want to thank everybody for being there today, to be able to hear a little bit about what we've been working on. I think the big take home for me is that it's, you know, every economy is dependent on ecology. And so if we don't take care of our ecologies, both our nutritional economy, our currency economy, our economy of material worth, all of it degrades. And so stepping back and looking at the big picture of how do we stabilize the ecological services that would help every community in this region, and then look and say, okay, here are these key interventions, and let's start to direct some of our funding right to those places that would have a leverage impact ecologically in a positive way to the entire communities. And I appreciate and just want to shout out to the NURI team, the DRC Uganda team, John Christoph, you and your team there, and Martin and Anthony and all the folks at NURI, just to say thank you for taking this forward in the way that you have. And I think I'll hand it back over for final comments for you, Nat.
Yeah, actually, so I see Jean Christophe, who's our country director in Uganda, and who's been leading our ship there. Chris, did you want to offer a comment quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I will not be long. I just, I think, first, thanks for the presentation, both of you. But just to highlight also that I would like to thank the Royal Danish Embassy and the government of Denmark for supporting this initiative. We can see that there is a lot to be done, and already we have done a lot. And I want to thank Srila and the coordination function of NURI for this fantastic teamwork. Not to forget, guys, that we have been continuing to deliver. We stay and deliver for the last 2 years under COVID-19 in Uganda. Cash for work, infrastructure, rural infrastructure, and also water resource management. And you can imagine the circumstances we are in Uganda. So I want to thank everybody for participating, everybody for organizing this event, and I'm sure more will come. And thanks again for inviting me. Apology for my head of program, Patrick Phillips. He's on his way out of the US, flying back to Uganda tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And also, Chris just reminded me, I mean, the group that's not represented here is the government of Uganda and our partners there, because we are working with the with line ministries at the national level, as well as the local. In every district, we're working with the government, engineers and technical departments. And so really big shout out to them. And yeah, I mean, for me, my final thoughts are just that this kind of thing can only, now is the time to be progressive and bold and forward thinking, okay? 17 years in this industry, I've seen a lot, millions, billions of dollars be wasted, and I'm not really sure always what the impact is. For me, I don't know how we can move forward unless this is at the foundation of what we're doing. Tech worship, creative financing and all these things can be great, but they can only be supplemental to real resilience building with an ecological focus. And what that means is that, yes, climate change is real and daunting, but this is where we can have an impact, and this is how we can bring resilience to extreme weather events and all the other types of vulnerabilities that arise from those through the communities that we serve. So I really want to thank, DRC for being an incredibly enabling environment, and Danita for extending that enabling space for us to create these sort of pilots and learn and share out. So thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nat, for that final wrap up. I just want to share again that we do have a public webinar available tomorrow where we'll be talking about this in about an hour's time, I think starting at 9 a.m. Jenny shared the link, and we'll share that in a follow-up as well. Please invite your colleagues. We'll have live French interpretation available as well. And thank you again, Warren and Nat, for your time and for leading us through this. Thank you to all of the partners and the contributions behind this effort. I hope this is just the beginning of the conversation, but as others have recognized, Danita, Danish Refugee Council, the government of Uganda, the NURI program, USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, the SCALE program, and all the others who added thought leadership and contributions to getting us to this point where we are here. I think this is a large effort, and there's a lot of space for everyone to continue contributing. So I look forward to the discussion continuing. And I'll note that we did record this session. We won't be sharing it externally or publicly, but we'd be very open to sharing it amongst the invites here and within the small circles of their colleagues. So please let us know if you'd like access to that. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you all take care and stay safe and continue the great work.
Thanks for making the time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.